Okay, Fraser, here's a question for you. Should you train in zone 3?
Well, Mark, you mean that whole grey zone? That area that we've been told that no, we shouldn't really ever train in and avoid that dreaded zone 3 plateau? No, I guess we shouldn't train in zone 3.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Zone 3 has got a pretty bad rap, but I'd say mostly because it's often used in the wrong way. Actually, zone 3 can be hugely beneficial, and today we're going to show you how.
Okay, Mark, I think we should look at reasons why this zone 3 training's been given such a bad name, shouldn't we?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I think it's mostly through our own actions. I mean, if you ever fall into the trap of constantly wanting a high average speed, a high average power, or even a high average run pace, I definitely have, and I'm sure many of you out there have too. And in small doses, it's absolutely fine. But if you're constantly doing it for every single workout, that's not quite so good.
Yeah, and I guess what happens is we start to hit this plateau, don't we? Whereas we're always going quite hard, but we're never really just going easy. And I suppose it means we always feel like we're accomplishing something in a training session and we come away from it feeling quite happy, but we're not giving ourselves any time to recover, which means that we can't then go harder and faster when we need to. So for example, if we're going out for a club ride and our mates decide to accelerate up a hill, we just don't have the ability to go with them because all we've done is train this middle of the ground fitness.
Yeah, and this is actually a really dangerous area because if you're not giving yourself that adequate recovery, you're constantly training at zone 3 where you can easily burn out. And this is why it's kind of given the names such as the grey zone or the zone 3 syndrome.
Okay, Mark, so what you're saying is there is actually an advantage at times to it though?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually training in zone 3 can be a really good thing and can be hugely beneficial to us, providing it's specific to the type of racing we're doing. So for anything over 2 or 3 hours, it's very likely that you're going to be hitting zone 3 for some extended periods of time.
Yeah, so what you're saying, Mark, is we're talking about Ironman 70.3 and above, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Although, what I will say is zone 3 is quite a tough intensity. So for some athletes, particularly novices, then hitting this zone for extended periods of time is really quite hard. In fact, what you might find is that for shorter distance events, such as Olympic distance, then racing at zone 3 is much more preferable for these distances. However, on the flip side, if you look at the pros, then they're racing quite long events, Ironman 70.3 and Ironman events, and hitting zone 3 throughout and above zone 3 for those races.
Yeah, and aside from these certain specificities for those race distances, it's also proven to really help with muscle endurance and strength. And with that increased muscle endurance, we're going to have more ability to cope with racing longer and not get as fatigued, and we'll also be able to deal with intensities better when we're out training. All
right, Fraser, so what is zone 3?
It's a good question, Mark. I really think we should go and have a coffee to chat about this.
So you're saying, Fraser?
Yeah, well, it is often described as an effort that's comfortably hard, or the fastest speed that you can do while still feeling relaxed.
Yeah, I guess if you, in training terms, if you're trying to chat to someone, well, you could say a few words, but you're going to struggle to have a full-blown conversation. If you look at this on like a rating of perceived exertion or RPE scale, then this is going to be somewhere around 6, maybe even a 7 out of 10. And with swimming, well, we tend to talk less about zones in swimming. We tend to use times and paces, but you will be probably quite surprised how often you hit zone 3 during a swim session. So for swimming, it's roughly 70 to 80% of your maximum heart rate or critical swim speed of plus 5 seconds per 100 meters. In cycling, this is 75 to 82% of your maximum heart rate or 75 to 89% of your functional threshold power. Then in running, this is almost marathon running pace. It's 70 to 80% of your maximum heart rate or 90 to 94% of your threshold run pace.
So far in this video, we've mentioned critical swim speed, FTP, and threshold run pace. And you might be wondering what those things are or how you can work your numbers out. Don't worry, if you want to see videos that we've done on those before, we'll throw to them at the end of this video.
Yeah, now what is really important to realize with zone 3 is that it actually incorporates an intensity that we all love to talk about, and that is sweet spot. Now, sweet spot is that intensity just above tempo and just below our threshold, and it actually crosses over between our upper end of zone 3 and lower end of zone 4. Now, it's a term that is being thrown around a lot within cycling and triathlon. It's a very popular training method because it's hugely beneficial. And although it is actually just a fraction below our FTP or our lactate threshold, it actually has very similar physiological adaptations because, well, with it being less taxing, we can do more of it and we can recover better between them.
Yeah, and the end goal being essentially to bump up our threshold or FTP level, and simply put, that means that we can go harder, faster, and essentially it takes less energy for us to do that.
Yeah, now we're not focusing specifically on sweet spot in this video, but it is really important to realize that zone 3 does incorporate that. So actually, zone 3 does not deserve the bad name that it is going to have. So now, let's take a look at how you'd actually use zone 3 in your own training.
Yeah, so you wouldn't instinctively set out in swimming perhaps to try and target your zone 3, and we've mentioned that already in the video. But it's actually something you've probably done quite a lot when you've been swimming. Let's take example, a progression or build swim set that you would do. And for the bulk of that middle portion of that workout, you're more than likely been hitting that zone 3, right?
Yeah, Fraser's absolutely right. And a good example of this build or progression set is 4 200s at an easy aerobic pace with an RPE or rating of perceived exertion of 4 to 5, then into 3 200s at this zone 3 intensity. It's comfortably hard, an RPE of 6 to 7. And then we're going into 2 200s, pushing on just above this pace to an RPE of 7 or even 8. And then finally finishing with 1 200 at an RPE of 8 or even 9, although you may feel, well, a little bit fatigued by this point, so don't be disappointed if you're not smashing amazing times out. This is the idea of the session.
Yeah, and for the bike, I'd often start people off with a session along the lines of 5 times 10 minutes is 6 minutes at zone 3 with 4 minutes at zone 2 as a recovery. This would then progress into 5 by 10 minutes as 8 minutes at zone 3 with 2 minutes at zone 2 as recovery. And then start building these into longer sustained blocks along the lines of 3 by 15 minutes at zone 3 with 5 minutes at zone 2 recovery between, or 2 by 20 minutes at zone 3 with 10 minutes at zone 2 recovery between.
Yep, and of course you can follow a very similar format for the run too. Start off with 3 times 10 minutes at 5 minutes zone 3 with 5 minutes zone 2 recovery. Progress this to 3 times 10 minutes as 7 minutes at zone 3, 3 minutes at zone 2 recovery. Then up to 3 by 10 minutes at zone 3 with 3 minutes at zone 2 recovery. And even extend this out to 2 by 15 at zone 3 with 3 minutes at zone 2 recovery. Now finally, to really make sure that you're getting the most out of these workouts and actually make sure that you don't overdo it too, then it's important that you're monitoring your effort as accurately as possible.
Sure, and if you don't have any other means of doing so, rate of perceived exertion is a perfectly good way of tracking how you're feeling. Just do remember to try and keep that at an effort of about 6 or 7 out of 10 on a scale of your effort. You're going to be working fairly hard and breathing quite deeply.
Yeah. But if you can, then using heart rate, pace, or even power is obviously far more accurate and actually is going to make your session a lot more specific and effective, and ultimately hoping to get the most out of yourself.
Yeah, so hopefully you've learned a little bit about Zone 3 today. You've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to click on the globe, subscribe, get all our other videos on the channel. And if you want to see a playlist that has the videos that I talked about previously in the video there about critical swim speed, threshold, FTP, then you can find that here.
Yeah, and if you'd like to see that standalone critical swim speed video and how to work out that pace for your swim, you can see that by clicking just here.